Welcome to Energy Radio. On this episode, we deviate a little bit from our normal base of guests, but I think it's going to be a fun one. Second time ever in Energy Radio history, where we have another podcast host on the show, which I'm excited about. And so, without further ado, I would like to invite or welcome Justin from Lakeside to the show. Justin hosts his own podcast, which he's going to tell us about. He's very involved in measurement and hydrogen, and I love Lakeside as an organization. So we're going to have a fun, wandering conversation. May mix in some U.S. or Canadian politics. Time will tell. Weightlifting, podcasting, who knows? But Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's definitely strange to be sitting on the other side of the table, so to speak. I'm usually so worried about where's the conversation going? I have to have my questions, so it's nice to just kind of sit back and let you drive the conversation.
And we have agreed we are going to flip the script, and I'm going to be a guest in the future on your show. So, but first, kind of give us. I always ask guests, give us your origin story, as if you were a Marvel, a superhero. Everybody has an origin story, and give us your last name, because I got cold feet as I was doing the intro to get your last name right. So start there. Give us your backstory.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, it's funny. I'm thinking of when I was interviewing for Lakeside, I had the same question, and I went on a 5-minute rant about my origin story, then our HR manager was like, "I'm just going to cut you off there. I think I get it, but
I won't cut you off."
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on how far you want to go back, but I've always had an interest in science and math, right? Which is, I guess, not very usual. I've always been interested, watching Popular Mechanics for kids growing up, Mighty Machines, all that stuff, and my parents aren't engineers. My dad's a lawyer, right? My mom was in insurance, so totally differential. My dad is so anti-math, right?
Okay.
And I just growing up, it was something I was interested in, and it didn't seem like anybody else was interested in it. So I kind of thought, well, if I could focus on that, then surely I can make money. If nobody, if nobody wants to do this thing that I kind of let's go do that.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of funny.
How young? I'm curious. How young were you when you kind of realized? Because I think often as we grow up, we're everybody's oh, you're like your dad, or you're like your mom, or how old were you when you kind of realized, there's these things that I like that is unique to me. What age were you when you realized that?
It was I'd probably say more in high school. I always had these inclinations, and I was always excited to learn about things, but I feel like it was every day I'd come home and watch Discovery Channel, and then I started to realize, hey, that was kind of not everybody does that, right? Learning about these giant ships, and it's kind of funny with TV kind of dying. I feel like I missed that, just because it was on Discovery Channel, I would just watch it, but I wouldn't just click some of these shows now on Netflix.
Right.
But anyway, so I feel like in high school I was figuring that out, and honestly, I really like talking to high school kids or university kids, and I did a lecture at McMaster because I really feel like I got a little bit lucky. I just so happened to kind of follow in some path that worked out for me, but it's not always that clear for people.
Totally.
And to me, it's all about they always say follow your passion.
Yeah.
But when you're 16 years old, what's your passion? Video games?
Yeah.
Right?
That girl walking down the hall, right?
Yeah. The Call of Duty for me. But It was every day after school.
Right.
Discovery Channel, Call of Duty, or how can I make money doing that?
Right.
But anyways, instead I realized it's about, developing skill sets.
Yeah.
Right? And so anyways, I was into the maths and the sciences, and I was debating between architecture and engineering.
Okay.
Because we had this, in my high school, we had a really good program, with AutoCAD and Revit, and so I was designing houses and stuff, but I can't draw to save my life, and so basically I had an interview at Ryerson at the time, or I guess whatever they're called now.
Toronto Metropolitan.
There we go. And it was hilarious. I knew I wasn't going to be an architect at this point, because so you come in this giant room and okay, everybody sit down, and you have 1 hour. Here's a piece of paper and a pencil. Draw the room you're in.
Really? That was your interview?
That was the interview for Ryerson. Wow. You do your application, you submit your portfolio of work, but then draw the room. And it was the worst drawing I've done in my life. And so I walked out and went, okay, I guess I'm not going to be an architect. I'll go figure out this engineering thing.
Right.
Then I went to school for engineering, and it was kind of funny.
Where'd you study? Got to get that.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, McMaster.
Okay,
yeah.
right on.
So, not too far away.
Yeah.
And so I had a great time there, and I had no idea what to specialize in. I didn't really know much about engineering. I just thought it was going to be hard, so let me go do that.
Yeah.
And
for the listeners, McMaster, we're both alumni. The first year is common, so you don't really have to pick your specialty until the end of year 1 into year 2.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had no idea. I had a chemistry teacher in high school who was a bit of a hard ass.
Yeah.
And we kind of had one of these. I feel like it was like a movie moment where he was like really hard on me, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna show him. You have a chemistry degree. I'm gonna be a chemical engineer and like one you up. And,
Right,
like,
right.
We had this moment at the end of the year where it was like, I don't know. I said something about I was your least favorite student or something, or I don't know, you didn't like me. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, I was only hard on you because I liked you. One of those like movie magic. And I was like, what? Like, oh my God. So anyway, I kind of was like, well, I'm already down this path. Let's go figure it out.
Okay.
And then it was a really good internship I had that really exposed me to sales.
Okay.
And because I still didn't really like, I'm not a cross your T, dot your I kind of engineer.
Right,
I'm a
right.
very big picture.
Yeah.
I like to learn.
Yeah.
I like to do different things. And so I got this cool internship at a company called Cleansoid, which has been bought by Dubois, or Dubois, as they say.
Okay.
Which is the American way to say
Sure.
Dubois, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was a lead generation internship.
Really?
And I was like, I didn't know what that was.
Okay.
I went in and interviewed, and then I basically found out on day one, you're cold calling. Like your job is.
Wow, you didn't know that until you started there.
I feel like he told me, but I was
Right.
I was like, I just need an internship. I need money. Like,
And were they looking for somebody technical?
they were, because
Okay.
the idea was, you could, when you weren't cold calling, you spent time with their like account managers or their technical reps.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
were in the field, you were learning about it, and then eventually you might kind of return back, and you have this experience like in a technical role.
Got it.
So yeah, it was like, I think I had 1,800 contacts when I started the job.
Yeah.
And you had to dial for dollars. Wow. And you had to book 20 appointments a month is what it started.
Okay.
And then by the end it was like 60. And then my list was like 800. Like I had got through so many.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
it was like, I have to say, it was the worst and best experience.
Yeah.
Because it was like, like you're dialing for dollars. You're racking your brains at every day. You're getting yelled at.
But you kind of need that in those formative years to realize you need to kind of push the edges on stuff to realize, yeah, that was terrible, but I'm actually quite good at it, and I've learned to like it. Or yeah, that was terrible, and I'm going to stay in school because I don't want to do that. Like I framed houses one summer, and it was very helpful for me from a technical perspective to understand things, and also to realize, that's not, kudos to everybody who's swinging a hammer, but for me, it's like, no, I'm going to stay in school. I like my air conditioning, right?
Well, and that's what I learned about this, was that I like the sales side, because I didn't know what sales was before. I thought it was dialing for dollars.
Yeah.
But I realized technical sales is so much more than that. It's way more fun. It's less about like trying to pull a fast one on you. Or like it's more about like, well, here's this technical solution, and now here's why you should buy it, right? And I say that, like, a lot of the university students, I say, you could be a really great engineer, you have all these great ideas, but if that's an idea on a piece of paper and you can't convince somebody to go invest in this, you can't convince the stakeholders, which is an important part you haven't realized yet, it's just an idea on a piece of paper, and it's basically useless.
Right.
So I realized that was a skill set that I had and I enjoyed, and I realized that at the time they were focused on like water treatment for like boilers and cooling towers, and I realized I don't like that industry.
Okay.
It's you're very much like a doctor. So you tell someone, hey, you need to work out, you need to eat right. And like all these things that people know.
Yeah.
And you might help them, like, okay, hey, I helped you lose a bunch of weight, you look good, and they go, why are we paying you? We look great. And then they fire you.
Okay.
And then they gain 20 pounds, they call you back, and you're there to clean up someone else's mess.
Okay.
So it was this very cyclical industry, and I enjoyed aspects. I enjoyed different customers every day, different situations, technical sales, but I didn't necessarily enjoy that industry.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
So it was good. It was good. I really enjoyed it. I had a great time. I still actually am connected with a lot of people from there.
Okay, sure.
A lot of them are now at Enbridge.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like paths.
Right.
You never know where paths.
Totally.
Intermix again. And then so basically I finished up my university, and I had a professor who said you'd never find a job in process controls. And it kind of was in my head, and that's what I know, and that's just what I specialized in. I don't really understand what the context was. I just remember that line. And so sure enough, I'm applying for jobs in university, and then there's a company called Lakeside Process Controls. I'm like, well, that's kind of what I specialized in. This has got to be up my alley, right?
Yeah.
I applied, didn't hear anything. And then 2 months later, I thought, well, this job is still here. So I reapplied,
Really?
new email address,
Yeah. Okay.
and I got it. I got an interview.
Wow.
So I still, I still think, I don't know, persistence pays off. Right?
Totally, it does.
And
Yeah.
so I interviewed a bunch of companies, and I, my heart was with Lakeside. I could
Okay.
definitely tell that it was going to be
And how long have you been there now?
just over 7 years.
7 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's great. And there's actually some elements to your story that I want to come back to later, which I think are fun. So Lakeside Process Controls. Is that the name of the parent company, or is that a?
That's everything.
That's
Yeah,
everything.
that's
Yeah,
it.
okay.
Yep.
All right. I've always gotten confused with the Emerson connection and that, but I think I finally figured it out. So Lakeside.
Yep.
Talk to us about them, what's the business, how do they engage with clients? Because for me, from my vantage point, you're unique, but let's talk about that.
Yeah. So you mentioned it. So we're what's called Emerson's impact partner, and so it's a very clear relationship that we have with them. And I try to simplify it and say they're focused on R&D, like research and development, manufacturing. Their expertise is that, like making the great products that we sell,
Right.
and then we're responsible for knowing our customers and selling them to our industry.
Right.
And that's an oversimplification. They have a sales force. We have
Sure.
manufacturing capabilities, but
Okay,
but that's
yeah.
kind of in essence.
Right, yeah.
So Emerson doesn't own us. We have we are all Lakeside is a company employee owned.
Right.
So and it's all Canadian.
Yeah.
So our territory is Central Canada and Nunavut.
Okay.
I haven't been to Nunavut, so
Right. It'll come. It'll come.
I've been on calls with people in Nunavut,
Right,
and it's
right.
like I can't call you for 2 weeks because I don't have cell phone coverage until I come back down to this area. And
Wow.
so yeah,
Wild.
we do Ontario, Manitoba, not all of Ontario. The Ottawa Valley and kind of like east of Kingston is call it like our sister company or
Okay.
brother company, Laurentide, down
Right.
to the
Oh,
east.
okay.
Just because I don't know, there's a long-standing history why they get that, but anyways.
Sure. Yeah.
And then out to the west is Spartan Controls, so
Yes,
west
right.
of Manitoba.
Okay.
And so we're the 3 Canadian impact partners,
Right.
doing very similar things. We're definitely all unique to some aspects.
Yeah.
But I think kind of our go-to-market strategy is we're local to our customers.
Right.
So we've got, I think it's 9 offices now across the 2
wow.
Provinces. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's see if I can get them all. So if we start out in the west, we
Yeah.
have one in Winnipeg. Then moving over, we have one in Thunder Bay. We
Okay.
have one in Sudbury. One in Port Elgin. I think
Oh.
2 technically in Sarnia.
Okay.
One in Hamilton or Dundas.
Yeah.
One in Mississauga.
Right.
And I think that's it.
Okay.
Hope I'm not forgetting one.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Laurentide does the East Coast then?
Yes,
In
East
addition to
Coast and Quebec,
In
yeah.
Quebec,
And they have Laurentide and Atlantic Controls.
Okay.
It's the same company, but they were separate at one point.
Right.
And I think they just keep it because of the reputation.
Right.
So that's kind of the basics of it. And so we represent Emerson's automation solutions portfolio.
Okay.
So that is like, we have an eye chart that can tell you all the products.
Yeah.
So instrumentation, control valves,
Right.
Delta V control systems, PRVs, a whole bunch of reliability solutions.
Right.
And then as an impact partner, we also have additional relationships depending on the local markets. So we have other companies that we're partnered with as well.
Okay.
And that's the basic kind of
Right.
shell of it, but don't really think of us as just people who sell products, because
Right.
I feel like that doesn't do us justice.
No, it definitely doesn't.
Like we have products, we have a ton of stuff in the arsenal, but really I think our value add is our expertise, right? We've been doing this for
Yeah.
70 years, basically, just
Yeah.
over 70 years, and we're everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people in our industry that are kind of small pockets, and I think that's a big challenge if you have multiple sites across a province or multiple provinces.
Yeah.
Having that single point that you can go to across is really helpful.
Yeah.
And then someone that you can lean on. So we don't get as heavily involved on the engineering side as
Sure.
obviously you do, but we try to help out as much as we can.
Yeah.
Or we try to take on some of that in what we call our innovation office. So it's the new one we have in Dundas.
Okay.
Which is where we have pretty capable manufacturing.
Yeah.
So we can do a lot more than just selling a widget per se.
Well, and I think what I've observed, and I am by no means a process engineering expert, but as you look at the instrumentation and you look at the controls, control valves, and automation technology, that continues to advance so quickly that whether it's us as a design shop or an owner, it's impossible to stay abreast of all that, right?
Yep.
And so that's where working with you guys closely to say, hey, here's the problem we have, and you guys saying, well, you could do this or you could do it this way, and to get either a more efficient solution or ideally a better quality solution that provides you the redundancy or the reliability or the control that you really want, right? That's where we have found, we by example, sometimes, we're getting better at it. We'll take kind of the first draft of a P&ID and we'll sit with you guys, and then you guys can say, well, what have you thought about this, or have you thought about this approach to controls, and you come out with a better design for the project, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really where you guys add a lot of value.
Yeah, and so just to do a quick overview. So obviously we have our sales team, but we have an entire engineering team, a project engineering team. We have an entire what we call our solutions team. We have an entire service team, and so each one of these has kind of different responsibilities. So what you're describing is possibly some combination of our project engineering team mixed with our solutions team, where we can sit down, we can go through that process with you. We can help you with that, help with the design. And then on the solutions side, that would be less defined stuff. So sometimes customers don't even know better exists, right? So it's going to them and saying, hey, you're doing this. Like, do you know that there's a better thing? And hey, you know what? Just cut the pipe here, cut the pipe here. We're going to drop in something for you. And that's where I think we're really pushing the limits now. And that's where we're putting a lot of investments.
Is that where Chuck works in that role?
Yep.
In that capacity?
Yeah. So I think his official title is Manager of Strategic Pursuits.
Okay.
Which is
well, Chuck's going to do whatever Chuck wants to do. Chuck's a friend of the show. He's been on the show at least once. But yeah, he's always telling me about some creative design that you folks have come up with for this RNG application or for that combustion situation, right? So there's particularly for brownfield stuff, right? Like greenfield for sure, but brownfield especially, where you're coming in, it's every time is a one-off, right? So to work with you guys is really important, I think, right?
And we've, like, on his side, it's the Arctic combustion side of the business is where a lot of stuff he's been involved with, but I think it's beyond that now. But that was a lot of where he spent his initial time, or second initial time.
It's his second trip around the sun, at least.
It was with the Arctic side of this, all the fuel trains, and I think that there's huge value. And it's funny. There's so many aspects to the business, and like each one is one that's kind of expanding at its own rate and its own trajectory. So it's hard to kind of be in tune with everything. But I think the name of the game is we hope to be your process automation experts.
And it's we've talked a lot about kind of when the project is happening initially, but. I had a conversation this yesterday with a client of ours who, had a slide valve on a gas compressor that's Vilter, so still kind of within the broader family, I think. But that took the whole plant down. But because of I don't know if it was with you guys, but it was with a kind of Emerson company. They had the spare parts and they could get up and running, right? So that whether it's in your shop or on their shop, but that whole uptime thing, whether it's control valve, whether it's instrumentation, having that partnership that allows you to keep uptime, that is it's one thing to get the design right, but then to make sure it runs at the level of uptime that you expect, that's critically important too, right?
And honestly, I think one of the differentials that we have is both our service team and our inventory. Right. We have, I think it's something like $10 million in inventory.
Wow.
Like we have a ton of stuff like ready to go exactly for that situation. And then our service team we have service technicians in each one of our offices. And so like just trying to be as close to our customers as we can, I think is really helped us. And it's kind of funny. You got me thinking back to, so when I first started at Lakeside, I was in inside sales. And my focus was Northern Ontario, Northwestern Ontario. So a lot of pulp and paper, mining, one steel. And the problem that they always had was exactly that, was uptime. They didn't necessarily care about accuracy, right? Like I've had many mining customers say to me, hey, if you got 95% on your test, would you be happy? And you're like, I mean, yeah. So they're like, why would we need anything better? This is mining.
Great analogy,
right? And so they're very hard on their instruments, and so they don't necessarily want the best of the best, right? Which is, I think, what we often have that. So they want something a little bit more economic, and the reality is they're probably going to break it. Like you're buying something that's going to last you 15 years, but you're probably going to break it in 2 years. So like, is it worth the investment of buying, the Cadillac of instruments, let's say? So anyways, at the time, we were really struggling with magnetic flow meters. So magnetic flow meters, very common for utility measurements, water flow rates,
Right.
slurry flow rates, super common in the mining industry.
Yeah.
And they often get eaten away or destroyed in some capacity or another, right?
Yeah.
They have, it could be as silly as someone rips out the liner because they think that that's not part of the meter and then
Right.
they have to buy a new one.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, or it could just be like too high of temperature or
Right.
a lot of erosion that ripped off. Anyways,
Okay.
these things are critical to run their process, and they chew through them. And so I kind of, as this is kind of where I cut some of my teeth, so to speak, was I said, hey, we need to put a program in place for our magnetic flow meters because we don't have them on the shelf. It's a
Okay.
2-week turnaround to get them from the factory.
Yeah.
And our factories are in the U.S. We have for flow, it's in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay.
And then for kind of our measurement PTL, pressure, temperature, level, some flame and gas detectors are in Shakopee, Minnesota.
Okay.
So anyways, it's possibly about, it might be 5 days to manufacture and 5 days to ship
Yeah,
and
sure.
get to a customer. And that's not going to do it.
Right.
So I was able to do an analysis. I figured out, okay, if we have this flavor, call it, of a mag meter in stock, 1/2 inch through 10 inch, that should cover us for this many applications. So I
Okay.
proposed it. We got it all going, and it was wildly successful. It was super
Okay.
helpful.
Cool.
And I remember this is kind of like my first time getting into the sales world. I went up to one of our mining customers, and I sat down there with a guy named Dennis. I still remember it. And I was telling him about this program, and we had brought Dennis donuts, of course.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And
yeah.
what we didn't know was Dennis loved apple fritters.
Oh.
We didn't have apple
Oh
fritters.
no.
And so I said, well, Dennis, I said, this is just like our mag meter inventory. I said, is there another donut I could interest you in?
Right.
And he goes, well, that Boston cream looks pretty good. So he takes the Boston cream, and I said, see, just like our inventory, it might not be exactly what you want, but we got it, and we'll still make you happy.
Oh, that's
and then,
good.
these guys being in Kirkland Lake were like,
yeah.
who's this guy?
Right.
Like, he's too slick. You're too slick. Go back to Mississauga. So I learned a little bit about sales from
That's good.
that
That's good.
situation.
Now, you mentioned a bunch of different aspects of the business. You started in inside sales.
Yeah.
What's your role now? What are you focused on within Lakeside now?
So my official title is Business Unit Lead for Measurement Solutions. So
Okay.
that's kind of everything in this overarching portfolio of instrumentation. So
Okay.
that's pressure, transmitters, temperature, level, all of our flow meters, and what we call our analytical solutions.
Okay.
So pH probes, connectivity, combustion analyzers, process gas analyzers.
Okay.
So that's where when we start talking about renewable natural gas,
Yeah.
hydrogen, those are really critical for that. So that's kind of my focus, and it's from the business standpoint, it's from the sales standpoint.
Okay, got it.
I also wear a bit of a marketing hat.
Okay.
Before this, I wore more of a technical hat.
Got it. Okay.
I was a specialist for
Right.
our flow products and our level products.
Okay.
And so actually just level for a while. So it was really I got that job right after inside sales, and I
Right.
went from freezing my butt off in Northern Ontario to being a level specialist, which no one told me meant climbing up like 50 stories
Oh,
of tanks
really?
all the time.
Okay.
So you're climbing all
Right,
these.
of course.
I'm like, I don't know which one's worse here.
Right.
but,
Right. Okay.
yeah.
So now you're focused on all the products
Yep.
you have that does measurement of some kind.
That's right.
Yeah. So this is like Rosemount. Like what are some of the other brands
right.
or other kind of technology that we'd be familiar with?
So for those listening, Rosemount pressure transmitters, magnetic flow meters, temperature transmitters. Most people will know of micromotion Coriolis.
Yes. Yep.
You might be familiar with net safety flame and gas detection, which
Okay.
has been rebranded to Rosemount, but
Okay.
it still takes time for people to
Sure.
go through that.
Yeah.
Another one that's been rebranded is Daniel Ultrasonic, has been rebranded to Rosemount Ultrasonic.
Okay. Okay.
And then the big news as of last year was Emerson acquired a company called Flexum.
Yes.
And Flexum is a non-intrusive ultrasonic
Okay.
flow measurement.
Okay.
And that one's really, really exciting for us because it complements the portfolio very well. To have a non-intrusive measurement it just simplifies things a ton.
Yeah.
Especially when you get to really hot applications,
Right.
really high pressures, really big line sizes. If you don't have to cut pipe, you don't have to install flanges.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about some of those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just
That's
as the
cool.
name Flexum, flexible meter.
Okay.
So those would be some of the brand names people would be familiar with, I
Got
think.
it.
Yeah.
Got it. So what are some of the, we talk a lot about, and you've mentioned it too, kind of the expanding energy marketplace. I mean, you talked about process, and we talk about oil and gas, we talk about pulp and paper, some of the more, conventional applications of your technology. But what are some of the more kind of exciting, particularly in the energy space stuff? RNG, hydrogen, maybe carbon capture, maybe not yet. But like, what are some of the exciting things that you guys are focused on? As you engage with your client base.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's definitely hydrogen. People are super, super interested in hydrogen and renewable natural gas. I've had the opportunity to go to the Canadian Hydrogen Convention the past couple of years.
Right.
That's been kind of the most of my exposure. I've been kind of going to it to try to stay as informed as I can.
Yeah.
But we've been really involved and before the show we were kind of chatting. Whether it's hydrogen, whether it's ammonia, whether it's natural gas, we don't really care because we've worked with all molecules for as long as we've existed. We're going to continue working with molecules.
Yeah.
So for a lot of customers, there's a lot of questions and concerns and uncertainty around hydrogen.
Yeah.
They've never worked with it.
Right.
But we have. So it's I don't want to say it's nothing special because there's lots of opportunity with it, but in terms of like how to measure the flow rate or the pressure of hydrogen, or to control it with our valve side of the business, like we know how to do that.
Yeah. Because there is, I realize and I appreciate that there's lots of experience, handling what we would conventionally call gray hydrogen, right? That's produced from fossil sources and other derivatives of that. But, compared to those of us who are used to handling, natural gas, or those of us who are used to handling steam, with hydrogen, I think from a process perspective, it's typically handled at much higher pressures.
Yeah.
Right. And then the molecule, as everybody knows, is much smaller. So there's the whole maybe talk without getting too deep down the technical rabbit hole that both of us would be uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you guys have experience with or knowledge of around both the pressure and the size piece?
Yeah. So when it comes to hydrogen, you kind of hit the nail on the head again. It's obviously the smallest, so it's going to be able to permeate through lots of things, which can cause a lot of challenges in your piping network.
Yeah.
But in terms of instrumentation, the small size and the small weight also can play a factor.
Okay.
So if we look at something like pressure measurement, there could be risk of permeation kind of through the seals that you might have there. I think that's more on the higher pressure end when you kind of get into that we look at, we have concerns around that.
Okay.
So you could plate your diaphragms with various materials. So the one we use is gold plating.
Okay.
I think nickel plating is also used, or like there's some others.
Gold sounds pretty good.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's there's a whole metallurgy team that has picked gold, but I think it's also gold because
I want to see the data sheet where we see gold, plating. Gold. Yeah.
So I
love gold.
Yeah, we just did a bit of a road show through Brandon, Manitoba, Winnipeg, and then back to Mississauga. We were talking before the show, and so we actually had a gold-plated diaphragm seal there, and I was kind of looking at it like, well, we should probably not leave this out overnight. All of the things that we have.
Why gold?
It has to do with the size of the molecules and the way it interacts. And I'm going to butcher it, try to explain it. But I don't know. I basically think of it as just like a nice shield that protects the hydrogen from permeating through it. There's something to do with the fact that it is, like where it is on the periodic table. If I read it before, I could have explained it to you.
I should have. Materials, year 2 materials at McMaster was not the highest mark on my transcript by any means.
No.
So I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. So anyway, so on a pressure side, temperature side, there's really nothing different with temperature.
Right. Okay.
We have some cool things to handle higher pressure situations.
Okay.
Or high velocities.
Okay.
So we have something called the twisted thermal well.
Okay.
So for those of you who don't know, when you measure the temperature of the process, you want to insert your temperature sensor as far into that pipe pretty much as you can.
Sure. Yeah.
There's heuristics, 2/3 of the pipe. Realistically, if you have a really big pipe or a pipe that's flowing really fast, there's a high chance that thermal well could break off.
Right.
So we do something called a wake frequency calculation. We run through the math and we figure out, where it is. And in general, to handle higher velocities, you have to make your thermal well shorter and fatter.
Right. Okay.
And that reduces the response time.
Okay.
Which, if you're trying to control a process, isn't great.
Yeah.
So we have this thing. We like to call it the twisted sister, which is not the official approved name. It's, It's the twisted thermal well.
Okay.
But basically, imagine like a straight piece of pipe that is. Imagine if it was like hot and then you twisted it like a bunch, and so it's kind of like a helix shape.
Yeah.
It's like a DNA kind of shape to it.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with the Marilyn Monroe Towers in Mississauga
Sure,
that have kind
yeah.
of the idea is that it's able to kind of shed, I don't know, again, the science of it, but it sheds the vortices in a certain way that it reduces the wake frequency.
Okay.
So that's something that we can do in some of these high velocity or high pressure measurements to measure the temperature.
Okay, okay.
You can insert it further in a standard thermal well,
Yeah.
without worrying about it breaking off.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your, I mean, again, this is really not a technical question. It's more of a best practices
Yeah.
question around, yes, there's an understanding that hydrogen or even renewable natural gas, biogas are not new, but for many people they may
Yeah.
be new, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of the, pitfalls that could happen, or what are some of the things to watch out for as, owners or other, listeners to the podcast are thinking about these new markets? What are some advice that you would give particularly from a measurement perspective?
Yeah, so for pressure and temperature, it's pretty standard. Flow is where things get a little bit different.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so that's where
Okay.
for some customers, they might not be as familiar with some of these
Okay.
situations.
Yeah.
And so it really depends on, the pressures you're operating at
Yeah.
and the temperatures.
Okay.
So we have a lot of experience on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So believe it or not, on the low temperature side, that's actually liquid hydrogen
Yes,
is
yes.
what you use for rockets.
Yeah,
Right? So
right.
we actually have specialized technology. So our Coriolis flow meter it's a mass flow meter.
Yes.
So it measures the mass of whatever's traveling through. It doesn't care about the density or temperature changes. So that's a good place to start whenever you're measuring something that is of high value.
Yes.
And so there's different things that we can do with that measurement to handle hydrogen. So on the low end, this is kind of a cool thing that I learned about. When you get really, really low, so I know we're not talking rocket fuel, but it is cool.
Yeah, sure.
When you
is,
get
yeah.
to that, when you're pumping liquid hydrogen, it's like 3 or 4 Kelvin. Like
Okay,
it's
wow,
that low.
wow.
And so it is below the freezing point of nitrogen.
Yeah.
Why that matters is so our Coriolis flow meters, they're basically 2 tubes. So if your pipe splits into these 2 tubes, and sorry for these people who are listening.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it travels kind of down and around and back up and out. So
Okay.
in this U shape or an N shape, depending
Yeah.
on which way you have it.
Yeah.
And then these 2 tubes return back together.
Okay.
And they're encased in an enclosure that we usually fill full of nitrogen.
Aha. Okay.
And so this is just kind of a best practice. When you get to these really cold temperatures, nitrogen freezes.
Right.
So we actually have to evacuate all of the nitrogen and put a vacuum in it
No
to
kidding.
handle that, or else you'd have like your tubes
Okay.
in like water sloshing
Yeah.
in like a liquid state,
Yeah.
sloshing around.
Wow.
So that's on like the really cold
yeah,
side.
yeah.
But
which is relevant, because as you listen to some of the hydrogen development stuff that's happening, moving it as liquid hydrogen is definitely going to be a key part of the industry, right?
Yeah.
So that is very relevant.
Yes.
Yeah.
the more common challenges that we're seeing are really low flow rates,
Okay.
if I could be honest.
Okay.
So because it's such a light molecule,
Yeah.
when you have really low flow rates,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it's impossible. It's just it gets a little bit tougher on those lower ends as you start to really drop off.
Okay.
And so in a Coriolis mass flow meter, we're measuring mass flow and we're measuring the density.
Yeah.
And both of those measurements are independent of one another.
Yes.
And in a gas state, we can really only accurately measure the mass flow, not the density.
Right.
In a liquid, we can do both.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of customers, if they don't have experience with gases, let's say,
Yeah.
or they might not be used to that.
Got it.
And the reason is a Coriolis flow meter, all of them don't have the resolution to detect hydrogen at 4 degrees versus hydrogen at 4.5 degrees, let's
Right,
say, versus
right.
if it was water, no problems.
Right. Okay.
So that's kind of one aspect, is those lower flow rates or any flow rate can pose a challenge for the density measurement.
Yeah.
But the lower flow rates can pose a challenge in terms of just being enough mass for the sensor itself to actually detect it.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the challenge is really it comes down to the application itself, what pressures you're operating at,
Yeah.
the flow ranges,
Right.
and it's all about the turn down.
Yeah.
Which is not that Little John song.
Right. Yeah.
It's all about.
I was going there.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
We're on the same page. It's all about what's your max flow, but
Yeah.
then how low do you want to measure? And
Right.
all customers want to measure to 0.
Yeah.
Which is why Coriolis mass flow meter is used. It's going to have pretty much the highest turn down of most technologies.
Right.
Versus other technologies can do it, but not as well.
Right. Okay.
So all that being said, as you get to those lower flow rates, it's really important when it comes to the meter that we select and the size.
Yeah.
And we might have situations where you might need parallel streams and 2 sets of flow to
right.
measure the low end and the high end
Yeah,
to a
got
high
it.
degree.
Yeah.
Just because there's a lot of variance in some of these applications.
Yeah. So what's your
as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, okay, the obvious, best practice is to engage, with the experts within your team early on in the design of a project. But my question would be from the owner's
Yep.
perspective, is this technology selection, this flow selection, measurement selection, is that happening by equipment OEMs, or is it happening by, kind of balance of plant engineering EPC companies? Like many industries, you have this push towards, the OEM has certain stuff on their skid, and then there's the integration of two or three different process skids together, right?
Yeah.
So how have you guys seen that, particularly in hydrogen? How have you seen that kind of work itself out? Are we, should we as owners and engineers, on behalf of owners, be doing more scrutiny of the OEM and what they're doing, or is it all happening off skid, and as long as we work with you guys, we're going to be okay? You know what I'm getting at there?
Yeah, and like I tend to think of it like no differently. I know we're homed in on hydrogen, but like any other project or any other application where there's industry best practices that are in place, and a lot of them are dictated by or recommended from the manufacturers.
Yeah.
And then we work with the OEMs, and we work with the engineering firms to make sure those are followed.
Yeah.
But with that being said, industry best practices can become outdated very fast. Right. And it takes a while to change. Or when you have, call it a new industry or like an emerging industry like this, those best practices aren't always in place. Or people are doing things very differently from the rest. So that's where I would say, more education and more scrutiny is required.
Yeah.
And honestly, a lot of our customers are very highly educated. Like they'll come talking to us and they'll ask very, very good questions.
Yeah.
Last week we had a seminar at Lakeside where our customers were presenting about how we've worked together. One of those customers being Enbridge.
Oh yeah,
and
heard of them.
and they're just a small little customer of ours. But and we're talking about our blended hydrogen solution that we worked together on in Markham.
In Markham, yeah.
And the questions from the customers in this room were very detailed, very specific. It wasn't like, where's hydrogen on the periodic table? Like it was like, how does the CSA code apply to this? How does this, get really into the weeds? And I don't think that's just for hydrogen. A lot of our customers are doing a ton of research ahead of time before they come to us, before they come to you.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're seeing it.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's a big industry change. And so this is why we spend a lot of time on marketing and education, because an informed consumer is going to make the right choices.
Yeah.
And someone who's not informed is just going to go with maybe where they have the best relationship.
Yeah.
Which, maybe 30 years ago was totally fine, but I really feel like industry has changed past since that.
Yeah, probably, the prevalence of the internet and how freely available information is, I think has just societally, encouraged us to do that research ahead of time, right? It's easy. It's easier to just, type it now, particularly with AI. It's just so easy to go to the computer and get 90% of the answer and then come in and just fact check that, right? So, what you mentioned, CSA and here in Ontario it's the TSSA. I mean, what kind of work are you doing, particularly not so much in RNG? It's relatively well developed there, but particularly in hydrogen. Are you guys actively involved with, CSA and TSSA and because that's in these new industries, that's often a challenge is the authorities having jurisdiction keeping up with that, right? So
I don't want to say yes or no about Lakeside because my involvement has been less so than some of the others on the team. I definitely know Emerson has been involved. Honestly, CSA from an electrical standpoint, and then CRNs from a TSA standpoint are super critical. And for all of our flow meters or pressure transmitters, right? All of them are pressure retaining elements. All of them have electrical components. So Emerson's been working very close with the bodies. Albeit it's been challenging in the past couple of years. I really feel like there's a lot of load on both those regulating bodies. And so,
I think that's a fair assessment. There's a lot on their plate. With all this, so we have to be reasonable in terms of what we expect from them.
So or response times too. And I think that's where at least we've been challenged with trying to release new products. Is delays with getting those approvals. So Emerson's been very well informed and involved with that, especially as it pertains to hydrogen. I know in particular that there's without getting into the specifics of the CSA requirements for some of our transmitters, there are specific class 1 div, I want to say 1 or 2 group be one of them. I forget the one off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Is for hydrogen. And there's some situations where we might not have that, or we're in the process of getting that.
Right.
There's ways around this where, if you just make sure that the transmitter of whatever you're talking about is remotely mounted away from a process, that there are ways.
Yeah.
A lot of times we work with customers to figure out, do you really need, this in this situation?
Right.
Would it be better for the instrument's sake and for your sake to maybe be working on it not in that environment? Right. Just as an example.
Yeah. Cool. What else is Enbridge? What else is Lakeside kind of excited about in kind of the broader energy? Is there anything else that we haven't talked about yet that you guys are, getting involved in that you're excited about?
Yeah, I definitely, we didn't really talk too much about renewable natural gas, but that's definitely something that's been really interesting. We've seen, whether it's landfills, whether it's, dairy farms, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of thought there and interest there around, how do we take this methane and how do we put it back into the network?
Which makes me think on the measurement side, do you guys have a GC product?
Yep.
You do?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so
that would fall under you?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have gas chromatographs. We have a variety of process gas analyzers.
Yeah.
GCs are going to be really common for that.
Yeah.
They're going to be really kind of the pinnacle of those.
Yeah, we're seeing that particularly in the U.S. with some of the regulations around, I think it's the RINs, or one of the key market drivers is requiring a ramp up in terms of how, I think you need multiple GCs, or anyways, my guys.
Yes.
But yeah, that whole measurement piece, particularly from as we do more and more accounting of carbon and more accounting of, offsets of emissions and things like that, better, higher quality measurement is just going to become even more important, right?
I was talking with a gentleman this week who works on sample handling side of GCs and analyzers, and he was saying that his company works a lot in the U.S. as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's something like 90% of the RNG projects are all in California right now.
Yeah.
And I think they have some pretty hefty credits involved to help kickstart a lot of these projects. And I don't necessarily believe we have the same in Ontario, or not to the same capacity. Yeah,
we don't. I mean, we have that California market. It's kind of gone through a boom and a bust cycle. Actually, the incentive was so large that you built out a market, but there was no contracts. It was an open market, and so you built out all these. Supply and demand said, okay, there's a big demand here. Then supply got built out to a point where now the demand has dropped because there's so much supply, right? Adam Smith, they've met in the middle. So I think that the nice thing in a Canadian context is you have BC and Quebec at a minimum, mandated to buy a certain portion of their natural gas as RNG. And so what you have different than in the US is you have long-term predictable contracts. Yes, they may not be as lucrative as they are in California, but from a financeable perspective, you can bankroll a project a lot better on a 10-year Fortis contract than you can on the spot market, with carbon in California, right? So
that makes sense. And I don't know how the numbers are working out, but it does seem like landfills are where the opportunities are right now.
Yeah, and that's primarily just because they're just so much bigger. The flow is just so much higher.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and that's kind of was the general sense that I was picking up. So that's kind of one avenue, and I don't know if we want to talk about it, but some of our biggest markets beyond the renewable. Well, I guess it is renewable. Beyond, let's say, exciting renewable or broadly applicable renewable is the nuclear industry.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So the nuclear industry is in any given year is our number one or number two industry for our market. Kind of wobbles between utilities and most times it is utilities.
Yeah.
But I think it could be number one, right?
Yeah.
So obviously Bruce Power and OPG are both going through, or at least discussions. Bruce Power is talking about maybe a third generating station. OPG's working on 4 SMRs.
Yeah.
So that's an industry that we're heavily involved with.
Okay.
On kind of all aspects of the business. So on the instrumentation side, primarily with pressure transmitters.
Okay.
So it's kind of a funny. OPG and Bruce Power, the nuclear industry in general, really doesn't want to change things if they're working. And obviously there's great risks with that. And so, we have some valves that have been actually long obsoleted or discontinued, right? I don't know the right word for this.
Yeah.
But we're still making them.
Wow.
Just for the industry, because they're
right.
so specialized. They do a special thing.
Yeah.
And on the pressure transmitter side, we have a separate group called Rosemount Nuclear,
Okay.
which is the manufacturing, but there's also an entire quality process related to this.
Yes.
And so we have these Rosemount nuclear pressure transmitters that are seismically rated, so they can handle certain levels of both, earthquakes, but then also radiation. So, the whole concern is, can you run your plant if you have, let's say, catastrophe?
Right.
Right. So you've got to make sure your instruments are rated for that. So
Yeah.
pressure transmitters, really anything, don't have any microprocessors. So it's really funny because you've got this technology that, quite frankly, is just as good as it was in the 80s or the 90s. Because you can't really change it. You can't make it better without risk. If you have radiation, you could kill all your instruments.
Right.
So it's a funny industry where you feel like you're on the cutting edge of things, but then you're working with some of these industries that they really can't be. They have to be tried and true. They can't be trying out some of these newer things because there's risk.
That's cool.
So nuclear is a really big industry for us, and that's where I see a lot of investment, a lot of excitement.
Yeah, and it has to be part of our future, right? It's just it's so critical, right?
Yeah.
So, cool. Now we talked a lot about instrumentation. You've been gracious enough to be a guest on this podcast.
Yes.
Tell us, you also have a podcast. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So it's called Closing the Loop with Lakeside Process Controls, and we debated about the name for a while just because there's a bunch of Closing the Loop podcasts.
Oh, is there? Okay.
They're all about crypto.
Okay.
I don't really.
Okay.
Yeah, which blockchain. I know enough about it, but I don't really know where the loop is there.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the idea is connecting with industry experts, to close the loop between your current knowledge and your,
got it,
latest and greatest in industry. And so obviously I have an instrumentation background, but others might have an engineering background or a control valve background. And so it's kind of a podcast that I've created so I could learn more without necessarily damaging my technical reputation, right? Like I can ask the stupid questions maybe other people are thinking, and people go, well, of course he doesn't know this about valves. He's an instrument guy, right? At least that was the initial thought.
Okay.
And so, so it's great. We've got, I think, only 7 podcast episodes published.
Okay.
And I've got 12 recorded.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so we kind of have a bit of a hopper. Kind of released them.
You got to start pumping them out.
Yeah. So it's been a fun journey. It's been.
And so you're the host.
Yes.
And the guests are clients or Lakeside folks or combination.
Yes. Combination.
Or,
yeah. So when we get you on, you'll be our first customer.
Okay.
Wow. So far it's been Lakeside and Emerson.
Oh, excellent.
Contacts, and just because it's been. I haven't crossed that bridge yet. I want to start talking to more customers, and I've always feared, are they going to be able to talk? What can they talk about? And but then when I met you and I stumbled upon your podcast, clearly it's possible.
For sure. And not everybody is made to be on a podcast, but I think by and large most people who and you see this too, you find people on the client side or elsewhere who are passionate about their space.
Yes.
They're very engaging in dialogue, and people love listening to it.
Absolutely.
Right? And we're not, are we going to be number one on Apple Podcasts? Of course not. But are we going to be number one in the hearts of, the nerds out there who are in this space? That's the goal, right? And most importantly, and I think yours is the same, is how do we bring value to people from this whole energy transition that we're all a part of? It's a big kind of task in front of us, right? And so we're all gonna we all need to learn from each other as we go forward, right? So cool. So what are some of the kind of things that have surprised you about doing a podcast?
So I've done a personal podcast before, so I had experience.
Oh, you did?
With
okay,
that.
I didn't know that.
I had actually at one point I had a little side business I was doing where I was building gyms.
Right. Yes, I was going to ask you about this. I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah.
So I ran a small business, and part of it was
during COVID, right?
During COVID, and I kind of engineering background. I'm also a powerlifter. I was a powerlifter.
Right.
And it's a small industry. You kind of get to know suppliers. And so I had these relationships, and I kind of thought, you know what? I built my own home gym during COVID. Yeah. Maybe I can make a business out of this. So I did. And with that, I had a little podcast that I did. So I had experience, and it was really easy because I was talking about everything that I knew and I was an expert in. It was all within this easy space for me.
Yeah.
Low risk.
Yeah.
And then when I transitioned to this podcast, it was actually surprisingly harder than I thought it was going to be.
Okay.
Because I'm talking about things I don't know anything
Right,
about. Like,
right.
and you're constantly on this cusp of, I need to keep this conversation interesting. I got to make sure I know the path where we're going. And I
Right.
got to kind of get to some point. But I also got to like understand and retain and like, so just being able to, especially when it's not an instrumentation guest.
Right.
Like
right.
it's like, okay, I need to like really understand how
Yeah.
this goes, and I need to ask a question it's okay to ask stupid questions, but something that actually provokes meaningful conversation and,
Right,
and
yes.
gets to this endpoint. So
yeah. And getting that kind of vibe with the guests. Some of them, will go on longer, and then you have to. Then sometimes you're worried about cutting them off, and others will give you a 3-word answer, and then you have to kind of probe them along, right? So there's an art and a science to it at the same time. Right?
I made the mistake too of telling people that, and I've stopped doing this, that, okay, the podcast will be an hour. Unless it's
Yeah.
not going so well, then it'll be only half an hour.
Right.
And I've never had half an hour because I say this and then I go, I can't possibly end it now. And
Right.
they're going to know how long was
Right,
that?
right.
Oh, I guess you didn't enjoy the
Right.
right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
another one.
Cool.
Or another thing that I've learned too is that if sometimes you want to interview people because they have a lot of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And not necessarily like, they're made out to do their own podcasts, right? Or many of them have never been on a podcast
Yeah.
episode. So most of them are nervous.
Yeah. Right.
So I found it's really important to don't just go into the podcast, just have preamble with them
Yes.
for like 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Build up that comfort zone so then when you hit click,
Right.
like it's not a big, like what's
Yeah.
that big red light?
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so-
And is it audio only? Is there a video component?
We do both.
Okay, cool.
Which I feel like I need to be more specific of because most people come and they go, "Oh, you're recording this?"
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and we're wearing this.
You do have to kind of give that up front. My experience. Yeah.
We're wearing the same shirt,
Right,
We're like
right.
we're wearing blue shirts and a blue background.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been fun, and I'm going to start a second podcast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Is
it-
this the first announcement of this? Is this
Yeah.
Are we breaking
news
right
yeah,
now?
breaking news.
Yeah. Good.
It is going to be internal only. So
Okay. Oh, bummer.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know. So that was like that was a roller coaster for me.
Right. Yeah.
But I kind of, and maybe you'll adopt it even too. It's a challenge for internal sales,
Yeah.
just to share knowledge with each other.
Yeah.
As you get bigger and we have all these offices, right? Like you don't know that John's an expert in this, or Ron's an expert in that. And so my thought was to have an internal sales podcast where you just interview a salesperson, 15 minutes,
Yeah.
and you talk about a very specific pursuit.
Oh, I like
and you
that.
say like, hey, what were the challenges? How do we overcome them? What did you learn? What did the
Yeah.
customer think about it? And
Yeah.
keep it internal so you can use customer names. You can talk about pricing. You can talk strategy, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then it's this great tool that you can share internally.
I like that.
So I'm going to call it, not that it really matters, Bell Ringer Radio.
Bell ringer. Okay. Wow. What's the bell ringer reference?
So when I was in my first or my second year at Lakeside, I had this similar notion where I said, hey, I'd like to learn more about what's going on at Lakeside. I have my little Northern Ontario bubble, but like, if we get a $2 million PO in our nuclear team, like I
Right.
want to know,
Right,
like that's
yeah,
exciting,
yeah,
like
yeah,
this is
for
cool.
sure, yeah.
So I said we need to get a bell.
Okay.
And people were
Okay.
kind of like anti-bell.
Like selling sunset kind of bell.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I had one on my internship. Every time we booked I booked an appointment, you
Yeah.
rang the bell.
Okay,
so I
cool.
kind of had it in my head.
Yeah.
And then people kind of thought, well, that's kind of like we're not that salesy, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
and what would customers think? And
Yeah.
I thought, well, I just thought it'd be a fun thing.
Yeah.
And so that year I won the Inside Sales Award at our annual company conference, and they decided to make it into a bell. So it's this funny
okay.
thing. So there's this like video of me like on stage in front of our company, just ringing
the
this bell.
That's hilarious.
And then what it evolved into was just like an internal on our internal website sharing success stories.
Yeah.
And it kind of died off with COVID. And so my thought was this is another way to bring it back without making people type a bunch of stuff and interview them.
Yeah.
So
it's
that's
easier to get the information out of people, and it's easier for people to consume it, I think, if it's audio, right? Like you
Yep.
and you're not going to get everybody listening to it, but
No.
but it's so much easier to just listen, when you're in the truck or you're at the gym or whatever.
Yep.
Or however, as opposed to writing an email. Like we all get enough emails,
Yep.
right? Like I love that. I'm going to rip that off.
Yeah,
Full disclosure.
and
Yeah.
full disclosure, I also so I had a guest from Emerson, and he kind of gave me the idea a little bit I've since morphed it. So I will say he gave me
perfect.
the original idea a little bit,
Yeah.
but he also stole my mag meter inventory program and made it across North America. So we're
Okay.
kind of,
There we go.
I don't know that we're even. I feel like he still owes me.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
but anyways. So,
Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Justin, this has been fun. This has
Yes.
been a great conversation. Appreciate you kind of sharing your history and Lakeside and what you guys are doing and how you can help clients. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to connect with you? Is it email? Is it LinkedIn? Is it obviously the podcast app on however you get that?
Yep. All of the above. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you want to add me on LinkedIn or send me a message there, it's
We didn't get your. I didn't get your last name. Give us your last name. Now,
Kozak.
they've been waiting all episode.
Kozak. So
K-O-S-C-A-K.
SCAK. So Justin Kozak. Yeah, it should be a Z.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I talked to my grandfather many times about it, and I still don't understand the story,
Okay.
but I think it was a translation error, really.
Okay, right.
Or it should be Koschuk, not
Okay.
Kozak.
Got it.
But he thought the SC was a Z, or
Okay,
yeah. So
okay.
there's a little translation, but
And
there are.
And where are the family roots?
So my grandfather's from Yugoslavia.
Okay,
Yeah,
Yugoslavia, okay.
and then my grandmother's from Austria.
Gotcha.
And then my mom's family is from Manitoba, actually.
Okay,
So actually, Manitoba Métis. So if you go all the
no
way
way,
back.
cool.
Yeah, so it's kind of a fun mix.
Yeah, really cool. Good.
So anyways, yeah, so if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you send me an email, justin.koschak@lakesidecontrols with an S.com.
Right, okay.
Go to our website. Should be pretty easy to get a hold of. Just call in our main number and ask for me too.
There you go.
Yeah,
Love it.
thanks for having me.
And then on your podcast,
podcast.
app, Closing the Loop.
Closing the Loop. Yeah, so
Okay.
wherever you get your podcast,
Yeah.
Spotify, Apple, all of them have it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and I look forward to being a guest on your podcast.
I can't wait.
I have done that once.
Oh, wow.
Somebody else's, so I'm looking forward to it again.
Oh, wow.
I actually have been a guest on this podcast when I used to have a co-host. She interviewed me.
Oh, that's cool.
So I'm looking forward to that. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in.
Yep.
This was another episode of Energy Radio, a fun one where we had another podcast host to mix it up for an hour. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.